I'm going to share my screen so we can start. Can you see a screen with pictures?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
Very good. Well, thank you everyone for having me in your group this afternoon. And well, for me, it's afternoon, maybe for you, it's still morning or midday. Thank you so much. I take this with great responsibility and humbleness. I am a baby in this journey, maybe a toddler. I'm still riding my tricycle. So please be patient with me. And I also come to you with a lot of questions and maybe little answers. So I am counting that our time together will fill some of the blanks. And even if we don't come up with all the conclusions, my hope is that this topic or topics will encourage us to study and find the answers. Initiatives or applications on how to live and walk this journey. We all know that we are close to the time when we're going to be tested. And we call this time the Sunday law, even though we know it's not going to be a Sunday Sabbath issue. It's going to be about equality. So I've been in this journey for the past several months, tracing studies that started in the camp meeting in Brazil in 2021. And I reviewed some studies from Elder Tess, and then I started a series from that camp, from Elder Parminder, and I've been going on, and those that are in my group in the East Coast know my journey a little bit, and my intention was that I was going to present the third part of my bias study for here today, because I have been studying presentation from Elder Parminder from May 2021, The Dangers of Cognitive Biases. And it was so vast, and it has been such a blessing for me. And I just had to investigate more, and I think it's going to be 4 studies, and I'm just in the second study. But after the presentations he did in the Brazil camp meeting a few weeks ago, April 6 and 7, my mind was all over the place. And he also mentioned one of the previous studies that I did as changing your worldview is not easy. That was from April 2021. And I said, okay, I'm going to stop right now the progression of the bias study that I had already studied and ready for presenting to you today, and come up with a potpourri with all these studies together, because they have such a big correlation. And after what we heard today before, I am happy that I did that turn. So I hope that it's going to be a blessing for all of us. So let me start to give you a little introduction so we can later on connect the dots. Be patient, because at the beginning it might not seem that it's all related, but at the end it will. So in my journey of studying about biases, let me tell you, I have a burden in my heart for this topic, because I believe that sometimes, and that's why they're called unconscious biases, they're so rooted in our psyche, in our thinking, in our way of life. They are so hiding behind there. And for us to eradicate patriarchy, for us to walk in equality, in diversity, in inclusion, to be real representatives of what equality means, we need to eradicate biases. So that's why I go back to this topic, because it's like a burden. It's in my heart. And I don't want to not to say, I feel that responsibility. So that's why I keep coming back. And I'm sure you have heard that there are biases. So there are about 180, some scholars say it's 182 biases that have name, and they have been studied and quantified and qualified. But for today's exercise, I guess, or topic, I just want to review what I presented last time, 3 categories of traps. And in each of those categories of traps, 2 biases. So we don't overwhelm ourselves, but just so we can have some footing on what we're going to talk or connect this to. So there are 3 main traps that represent common circumstances when our brains are most susceptible to biases: information overload, feeling over facts, and need of speed. And I think those labels are very, we can kind of understand what they mean, but let's look into it a little bit closer. Maybe like a bird's eye view. When we are in circumstances in our daily life, the brain pushes more information to the side to focus on the 40 bits of information that can process. And I don't know if you have heard of one of the studies before, but it's something that I keep repeating. The human brain takes about 11 million pieces of information each second. However, it can only consciously process about 40 to 50 of those bits. So for the brain to manage those under 10,999,960 non-attended bits of information, the brain has to make shortcuts. And these shortcuts are time-saver strategies to allow humans to reconcile a volume of information that's coming, push something aside, and then make some judgment or decision on what's in front of us. But at the same time, when all this is happening, facts get distorted, give us inaccurate judgment, and twists reality. So there's a lot of damage that occurs in our daily process of information. And in that process, our brain sometimes pushes aside important pieces of information. When we are overwhelmed, highly emotional, and rushed, and I don't know about you, but that's pretty much a picture of my day, your brain is more likely to lean on these shortcuts. Let's define these bias traps in more detail. So the first one in our depiction here is information overload. When we face an overwhelming amount of data input, we are at risk of information overload. Our brains have learned to automatically filter much of that information, even the bits that might be useful. For example, if we have hundreds of applicants in a job, and we have all these resumes to go through, most likely we're going to make a fast assessment, and we're going to use either confirmation bias or anchoring bias to make this fast assessment. Let's look into these 2 biases. Confirmation biases is the idea that we tend to seek information that supports our existing beliefs. It's a way to filter and focus. For example, when we want to catch up the news, we don't watch all available outlets of information. We don't have time for that. We are not investigating reporters. We go to a source that we feel comfortable with, and we listen there, or we read there. Plus, we have studied two streams of information, so we know a little bit about this. Or that example that Elder Perminder gave is about laundry detergent. We have seen commercials about certain laundry detergent over and over and over. We go to the store to buy laundry detergent. We pick up the one most likely is in our eye level shelf, and it's no name that we recognize. We pick it. We trust that brand. So that's confirmation bias. But I just want to add, in a research, it shows that people experience genuine pleasure, like a rush of dopamine, when processing information that supports their beliefs. So there's like a mental reward we get when we make a decision on something that we already believe, that confirms how we feel about a situation. And I think that's very interesting. The other bias that it's in this trap is anchoring bias. Is the idea that we rely on the first piece of information we see to make a decision. Anchoring biases is evident in first impressions. Do you know that we take 7 seconds to make the first impression of somebody? For those of you that don't know me, today, the first time you saw me or heard me, in 7 seconds, your brain already made a picture of who I am, my character, my everything. Just 7 seconds. And it's involuntary. There's not much we can do about it. That's how our brains function. We can do we can take that information and then slowly process it, reprocess it, and change it. That's why it's so important to understand these traps. The next column, the next trap that I want to review with you is feelings over fact. Two common biases in this group are in-group biases and negative biases. In-group bias is our tendency to favor people we like or those who are like us, while excluding those that are different. The next bias in that trap is negative bias, when we are more powerfully affected by negative experiences than positive ones. So we have had a bad experience with somebody from a certain race or a certain company, or let's say a supermarket. We had a bad experience in this supermarket and we say, oh, the supermarkets are bad. They don't treat you right. We anchor our bias on a negative experience. And the third trap I want to mention here today is the need of speed. Need of speed occurs when we have to cut corners and act quickly. Often these time savers are based on biases and can be simplistic, self-centered, and even counterproductive. Two common biases in this trap are attribution biases and sunk cost bias. Attribution bias is the idea that we judge others on their actions, but judge ourselves in our intent. If I make a mistake, I had a very good explanation for it. But if my coworker or my family member makes a mistake, they're fundamentally flawed, they're disorganized, they are careless, uncommitted. Sunk cost bias is a tendency to continue our current course of action because we have already invested too much time, money, or energy into it. Okay, so we got to this point, and we already know some traps, and we know some biases by name and last name. and we are able to see them at glance and maybe recognize the traps. But now you're going to say, Isabel, why are we talking about this in our study if in your background, you're saying that your topic today is liberal, period, biases, period, radical, period. Well, let's move on to another topic. And let me tell you, we will come back to tie this all together. Don't forget about this picture of the traps, because I think it's going to be useful in a little bit. So here I want to present to you 5 important characters in the history of feminism in the United States. And I think also they have repercussion on their actions in the world. Anybody can recognize the first picture towards the left?
Gloria Steinem.
Very good, Francisco. Gloria Steinem. Do you know anything that you can give us a couple of pointers about her or anybody else?
She was in leader of the women's movement.
Very good. Between the 60s and the 70s, that's when she was more prominent.
Right.
Anybody else? Anything about Gloria Steinem?
She's an activist and a feminist.
Very good. And you know, she's still alive today. She's about 90 years old.
Still active.
And she's still, yes, she's still at it. Very interesting. I found out. The next person next to Gloria, anybody recognizes that picture?
Angela Davis.
Very good. Anybody wants to offer some information about Angela?
Do you know anything about Angela, babe?
She's a Black Panther, isn't she?
Yeah.
I was gonna say protester.
Yeah, she was an activist.
Yeah.
She was an activist. She's 80 years old now, but she was a very, very powerful activist in the 60s, was it?
Yeah.
60s.
Yeah. She was even in prison by, she was a professor in UCLA. And while Ronald Reagan was the governor, she went to prison for something. So it's a little controversial, her story, but I saw an interview from May 2022 from CBS this morning. It's so interesting, and I've watched a couple of her talks. She still talks in universities, and I learned so much about feminism just listening to her speeches in different locations and circumstances. Very good. The next one, I think that one everybody knows.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Very good. Anything that pops out about Ruth Bader Ginsburg?
It's the best thing that ever happened to the pathetic Supreme Court.
Very good. Very good. How many women before her had been a Supreme Court justice?
I think one.
Only one, yes.
One.
Very good. And from all these pictures, she's the only one that is not alive, but she was active until she died at 87 years old. Okay, next to RBG, who is that picture? Anybody?
Tarana Burke.
Very good. Very good.
She's the founder of Me Too movement.
Very good. And do you know when she started working on the Me Too movement?
Way before then. Way before it came out as a big thing.
Yeah. Some places they trace it to 2006, mainly 2007, but it really didn't take off or solidified or became a hashtag as we know it now until 2017. but she did not stop working. And what was the main thing of Me Too, her movement? Anybody? Her work based on defended
Sexual violence.
exactly, and make it prominent and make it safe for people to speak out
Right.
in the workplace. In what industry really was benefited by this movement in 2017 that caused a big shaking?
Was it Hollywood?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good. As something, a name that is prominent that went, that was taking off
Do you
the
mean
market.
Weinstein?
Very good. Very good.
Do you know they just overturned, yeah, in New York?
No.
Yeah. And he's still in jail, but his attorneys overturned the New York,
No.
Yeah, they did. They did. And they're working their way to trying to overturn all the other ones.
Here in California because of a little technicality.
Right.
yeah.
Because of a technicality. Why did they do that? Because the they didn't do something about the court, the way they did things or something like that.
They had
They're trying to find a loophole or something to
Right.
just,
Right.
very good. So she's about 50 years old. I know we haven't heard the last of it from her work. So that's somebody that is always to be on the lookout, what they're doing, what they're working on. Because of her age, we know that she still has a lot of trajectory ahead of her. So it's a good reference. And the next one, we know
Hillary Clinton.
everybody.
Hillary Clinton.
Very good. Tell me something about, other than she was wife of a president or secretary of state. Let's think about something that she did for feminism.
Well, she spoke out a lot for women's rights.
Yeah. She was the first legal female chair of the Legal Service Corporation in 1978. And she delivered her famous women's rights, our human rights speech in 1995. So that phrase is linked to her. Plus her concession speech in 2016. It's a very important speech to understand, to study. She's 76 years old, but I don't think we have heard the last of any of these people that are still alive, to be honest. I think they're very prominent, and there's many other women. I picked these 5 just to give us a refresher of things current to our lifetime. And I want us to review a little bit of the history of feminism. And I took this from Elder Tess's study. I didn't want to add more to her line. The only thing I added was the 2007, the beginning of the Me Too with Tara Burke. I just wanted to acknowledge it, but it's not in Elder Tess's line. I just wanted to make that clear there. Anybody that wants to give me 1 or 2 points of the first wave of feminism?
They were fighting for the vote.
For the vote. And why do we call it cultural feminism, the first wave? Anybody? Even if it's not a textbook answer.
they were still like separated, you know, even in probably even in for most of them in their thoughts of with the patriarchy.
Yeah, it was like fundamental things that we're fighting for. Voting rights, healthcare, you know, economic stability, things like that, right? It was not, they were not like deep things, but it was a big fight. We need to recognize it was important work. We would not be where we are.
In those days, I think it was considered radical
Yeah, oh,
to
definitely.
fight for the simple, the simple things that it's fighting within the confines of the patriarchy that they could see that maybe the patriarchy would accept. But the thing is, at that time, it was very violent against them, and they had to be radical. They just had to.
Very good, Donna. And that point, remember that point, because that's something that we're going to be able to trace. What is cultural now, it was radical then. And that's very important to keep in mind. And
You have to
so let's go ahead.
baby steps, because to get to be liberal, first you have to get out from under the yoke of being a possession.
Yes, very good. Yes. So it's like a ladder, right? Little by
Yeah.
little.
Yeah,
That's how it's won. It's the thing is that don't stop. Don't get
Right.
stopped, right?
yeah,
Yeah. And they even pass help Black women on the other and other women of color, they were able to finally pass the voting rights for everyone in 1965. So their work, it's fundamental. What about the second wave? Anything from the second wave that pops up?
this more of a sexual revolution, autonomy for women to be able to go to work, be free with their own bodies. It's an autonomy type of revolution for women.
Yeah. And there we see Gloria Stein, and with her, there were other people, like Bella Abzug. They founded the National Women's Political Caucus in 1971. Some high points of the second wave included the passage of the Equal Pay Act and the landmark Supreme Court decision of Roe versus Wade in 1973.
I think we saw a lot of Planned Parenthoods too during that time as a result.
Yeah.
You know, where you could go and get contraception and care that wasn't given anywhere else.
Yeah.
And abortion was a big issue too back then.
Yeah.
And women had to go back, what do you call it? Backroom abortion. They were having to get abortions illegally, and many women were dying. And that is the reason in 1972, there was one woman that actually died, and they had photos of her, and it was just horrendous. And that was one of the big reasons why they decided to pass, Roe v. Wade, because of so many deaths that women were having to go and get these illegal abortions in these backyard
Backroom.
doctors, so-called.
Yeah. And even though they had so many achievements during that second wave of feminism, they lost momentum in 1980 when the Republicans, the conservatives, all took the White House. Even though it was Ronald Reagan that it was not an ultra conservative, But there's something interesting, and I heard this comment. Conservatives always go back to where they go back when they are like trapped and they see they're losing the power of the people, or they go back in time instead of moving forward and coming up with new, like, okay, all the women's revolution, let's how we can adopt it in our ideology. No, they go back. So it's always bringing them back. It's something that we need to keep, because it could be a trap for us, that those of us that come from a conservative mindset, that we might want to go back to where we were comfortable in our conservative ways and learn from that mistake. Let's move to the third wave of feminism. And in somehow it's our present time, but I'll tell you a little bit about it later. But tell me what brings in your mind, what are characteristics of the third wave of feminism? And we call it radical, but I'll ask you questions about that in a minute.
Well, Anita Hill, of course, who stood out in front of everyone and explained what happened to her. That was a huge for her to do, to stand up against somebody who was so much power.
That was 1992. And what is so remarkable is that Clarence Thomas is still sitting in the Supreme Court.
Exactly. And she is
Right,
still
and we know at that hearing, 1992, that we knew that somebody was not telling the truth. But today, in 2024, we know who that somebody was.
exactly.
Yeah. Anything else that pops up that we can label radical feminism, that it's being like, okay,
We're really having to push harder against you know, the suppression of sexual abuse and stuff, like with Weinhardt and Crosby and everybody getting off on these on their, even though they get sentenced, now they're getting released, right? Or have it's like those people in charge are, you know, well, they have too much power and they're just letting it go because nobody thinks that it matters if a woman gets raped or sexually abused all around the world.
yeah. And I think it started to change some things. And something very important, it was not just women's rights, it was transgender rights. It was very much more inclusive and much more complete.
Right. Good. Yeah.
And some people say there's a fourth wave of feminism. I didn't want to put it on my board again because I want to keep what Elder Tess did intact. But I want to mention in this part of what, because the fourth wave of feminism, and maybe some people are even saying a fifth wave, is like a progression of radical feminism. Is just different approaches and different agendas, but the main thing is a word that I learning about, intersectionality. So this fourth wave of feminism, which is a continuation of radical feminism, focuses on intersectional approaches to feminism, the empowerment of women, and the use of impact of media, internet, and social media outlets. And so I went to look into what this intersectionality means, or intersectional intersectional theory is a term first coined in 1989 by American civil rights advocate and leading scholar of critical race theory, Kimberly Williams Crenshaw. It is the study of overlapping or intersecting social identities and related systems of oppression, domination, and discrimination. And as that little depiction under it, it's not like it shows that it's all interrelated, that what we are advocating for, we're standing up for, it's linked to so many layers. It's not isolated situations. For us, I think in our journey, it's very important that we understand that the layers and that one thing is linked to others, because it's not just one part of that agenda. There's more to what we are wanting to stand for, because one thing leads to another. It's not just abortion rights. It's not just racism. It's not just ageism. It's all linked to each other, because we're human beings and we are all more multidimensional. Any comments on this or any thoughts?
I think this is really good, and I'm really glad that you brought that fourth wave in, because I've looked at that and thought about that too, like you said, that there's even a fifth. But I go back to the number 4 even, right? Because the fourth generation, the last generation, and the complexities that are being brought to view through the intersectionality, and the fact that that term was coined in 1989, you can see that's the clarity that's coming into view, because it began simplistically, right? They were having to do what they could. I think it was Christine who said to even break out of the confines, that they were constricted by, and then the progression. But here you can really see a lot of clarity, that it affects every aspect of people's lives.
Yeah, it's so layered. That's the best way, the best word I can find to is like, it has so much depth and dimension. It's not just one issue. Okay, so let's all think together and go back a couple of weeks ago when Elder Parminder did those 2 presentations on liberal feminism and radical feminism. And they compare and contrast. And maybe some of the answers here were given by one of you, because these are the answers that everybody gave between him and the audience, right? So the ones that are under liberal are personal liberty, personal is political, culture, society, works with existing framework, no personal sacrifice, no pain, no gain, just do it. The ones in the radical column are extremist, progressive, modernist, fundamentalist, inflexible, aims to eradicate the root of the problem, personal sacrifice, new framework. In these 2 weeks that we've been thinking about that, anybody has new ones that you can write in there? Anybody?
Like new descriptors?
Yeah, more things that you thought about in these past few weeks. I don't know if you got the chance to listen to the presentation. That's like, oh, and this or that, or maybe something that is there that you don't agree with, or just
Like we have
Well,
to take a look at all of it.
I thought personal is political would also be radical. So I might have something, I might need more clarity. And then Elaine brought up an excellent point last night that the radical feminists were proposing, I hope I get this right, Elaine, were proposing that women be paid for labor because childbearing and childbirth is labor.
It makes sense, right? The name has it.
Yeah, and unpaid labor is slavery. So I wondered if there was a way to label that, because that was a really profound thought.
Yeah. Anybody else? Any thoughts on this compare and contrast? Well, let me move on to my next question. Do we have or we had biases regarding the the word liberal?
Yeah.
If feminism is equality, and liberal feminists work so hard to produce such impressive body of work, for years fighting and promoting equality, why then we had such stigma on them? And this is one I want to go and link to some of the traps. The traps that we review at the beginning about bias traps that we can pinpoint. Maybe, and I don't know if it's going to be right or wrong because it's subjective, right? But I'm thinking, I'm going to bring back in there the traps and the biases. Can any of us maybe link what we have, how we came to think that liberal feminists were not good enough?
I have just one thought,
Go
Isabel.
ahead.
Thank you for this
Go ahead.
study. I'm thinking of the mindset of a conservative, our morals that are attached to our judgment of others in this realm of being liberal.
Yeah, and we right away, we go, oh, liberal is bad, right? Let's not
Yes,
even look into
exactly.
it like it's bad. And
Mhm.
I think it was Donna that said before that, or Donna or Christine, that the cultural wave of feminism, they were radical at their moment. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they had to be. I mean, because they were coming up against a fundamental belief throughout society that was very pervasive, that then they were starting something completely, totally new. So they really had to be radical.
Definitely. And that's, I just wanted to bring this up because we were so fast. I remember when we first heard the study, so fast to, oh, anything that has to do with liberal feminism, like, no, don't even. I'm a radical feminist. And maybe we not even took the time to see that actually the core of the work was done on that era. And it was hard work.
I see liberal, I see it as a step, and then you have radical. No, it's another step upward. It's another bar. So it is a step.
It's like a building block, right?
Yes.
And the purpose of this is to show us that there's progression. We don't want to get stuck in there, but also not allow our biases not to look into something. Because if I encounter somebody that has characteristics of something that I consider not good, whatever it is, you know, I'm not going to give that person even a chance to get in around their circle so I can be an influence to their walk, because we are carriers of this message. We cannot just assume or write out people. And the main thing I'm trying to bring this up is not just to defend liberal feminism versus radical, it's just to see how easy we go and dismiss something and move on without even looking into the details of a situation or a person. And that's where I'm more concerned of how we write off people because of labels and not looking into that person's character, experience, situation, so we can be an influence to them. Any other comments or questions on this?
That's a really excellent point, Isabel. Because there is a tendency to hear something and shut the whole thing out, right? And you're so right. You could be missing something so important. And it's like carrying a torch. When you were talking, I was even thinking the Olympics, when one person carries and passes the torch to the next. You could see how cultural passed the torch to the liberal. Yes, there's lots of backlash, but the torch is meant to continue going, like the race that Paul talks about too. And there's so much to your study. It's hard to, because we build these structures from early on in our mind, like you said, information overload, right? From very early on, we build shelves or cabinets in our brain so we can file information quickly. And yeah, so anyway, a lot to think about. Thank you, Isabel.
Thank you, Susan. Very good point. So let's move on. And I know you had some conversations about human rights and the work of the United Nations last week in one of your studies, but maybe this is like in a different little context. But I think we can compare and contrast what happened to us with the word liberal and the work of the United Nations and the Declaration of Human Rights. And I'm taking this point from one of those presentations I mentioned at the beginning from Elder Perminder. Changing our worldview is not easy. When we start moving from ideology to humanism, and it was such a difficult shift for many. And we were, if many years ago, like he explained, we were presented with the thought that the UN would do something good, we would have said, no, not in a million years. But then he taught us that the French did right by burning their Bibles. And I don't know if you remember that study, but it's a very important study to connect with. Is Changing Worldviews is Not Easy, from Guadalupe 2021. In that study, we review how important the work of the United Nations was in creating the Declaration of the Human Rights, led by the First Lady of the United States. That was published in December 10th, 1948. So I would say at that moment, she was a radical feminist. And the fact that the First Lady of the US was the one spearheading this initiative, it also has a significance for us in the message. We noted then that the study that we would have not welcomed anything coming from the United Nations. But because we're moving from ideology to humanism, and we went through that painful struggle, we were encouraged that by using parable methodology, we can see the principles and apply it in our journey. This journey that we're taking back to Eden. So when we come and we encounter those moments and biases pop, they say, oh, anything that comes from the United Nations is bad. Or anything that comes from Martha or from John or from Peter, like, no, I'm not going to give them a chance because I have something in the back of my mind that wrote a story about that situation or that person, and I don't give a thought, and I don't take the time to reason and use methodology. And Elder Parminder, in one of the 2 studies from Brazil this year, he made he touched on this point, and I just want to remind us about the Bereans. They're known in the Bible, and we know them because they were open-minded, noble, and willing to change. But they were well known. They were willing to change, not so much for what we once thought about, but if we listen to that presentation, we understand that most importantly made them prominent or successful in their inquiries, in their daily studies, is that they were willing to listen, to imitate Paul and the methodology of his teachings. They were not using conventional wisdom. They were using reason. They were not rejecting the message. They have accepted the principles of Paul the way he was giving them, like Lazarus and Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus, getting every drop of information, example by example, parable by parable. Not like Martha, trying to find out things on her own. For us to accept the principles of radical feminism, we need to use the methodology and stop getting caught in levels. It's not about the clothes we wear or the food we eat. It's about the methodology. And after today's study, previously to this, I would say like the Bereans follow Paul, the message of Paul and the methodology, I want to encourage each of us to hold on to Elder Parminder's message, his teachings, and the methodology, because we're in the line of success. And as long as we walk in the line of success, we're going to be able to come triumphant at the end in our journey back to Eden. As we move on, studying this topic of liberal and radical feminism today, we heard from him and from the ones in the group that there was an intrinsic weakness that the liberal feminine movement had. And we know that the weakness of the liberal feminine movement was that they are not willing to find the strength to break away from the structure. The personal is political, yes, but it comes with personal sacrifice. So the problem is that to achieve equality, they employed the same existing framework. And I was trying to illustrate this, and excuse me for my first grade, second grade depiction here, but I wanted to illustrate it with scaffolding. So liberal feminists use the scaffolding in the construction of this society, ideal society that feminists had, that had been working for decades if we can start with the cultural feminists, from the first wave of feminism. And this scaffolding started to be built. And the liberal feminists, they struggle. I mean, working in scaffolding is not easy. They had to grab onto these bars and climb floor by floor and trying to win within those parameters, those structures. What the radical feminism does, or in order for them to gain the rights they want, they propose or propone that they have to get rid of the root of the problem to achieve equality, dismantling the system. And that was a price that the liberal feminists were not willing to do, or maybe they didn't have the strength to do it. It was too hard. They were going to lose too much. But that's where we find ourselves today. We find ourselves in a place of a decision, where we want to stand, where we want to work. Because if we keep working what our fight is, or our charge is, for equality within the confines of the scaffolding, and we don't move up to the structure where it's free from the existing framework, I don't think we're going to be able to gain the ground we need to. But as Elder Parminder told us, who likes extremists? If we want to be in the place where most people are, where we are accepted, welcome, or maybe like we say, well, we're on the sidelines. It's not painful enough, but I don't think we can get the results we need. Again, who wants to be associated with them, associate themselves with extremists? This is the problem of being radical. No one likes you. You and most people who follow the norms of society don't want anything to do with you because you're an extremist, you're a fundamentalist, you're inflexible. You're a little rock in their shoe that is going to remind them every time they're going to say a joke that is inappropriate, every time they're going to make a decision politically that is not following the principles of radical feminism. You're going to be there to remind them. And they're going to remind you how extremist you are. This comes with great personal loss. There's a big price to pay. And that's what we have to ask ourselves. Are we willing to be an extremist, a radical? And I know, I speak for myself. I still don't know what it all entails. But our greatest need right now, and I'm going to give you some points as we conclude. And it's kind of like our charge, our homework. We need to understand our work and our role in this world. And most of these are taken from Elder Parminder's study. We need to be able to see through the lenses of a radical. We need to understand what that means and the implications that that brings. We need to understand, to recognize the counterfeit. Very important. We need to be courageous to recognize bias traps that will hold us back, will make us make the wrong decisions, especially when we are just using our fast brain. Radical feminism does not have gender. Remember that. It's not all about, okay, let's put all women in charge because we're radical feminists. We need to be very careful with that. Radical feminism doesn't have gender. It includes all, and it needs all. And when we are talking about a group, a corporation, a movement like us, our families, we need to rely on the people that have the best skills to do it. Knowing that those people that we are surrounding ourselves with are like-minded, that we're all walking towards Eden, that we're all radicals. So we need to give trust to those that are leaders, because we know that we're in the line of success. God has put them there for a reason. And our job is to support them the best possible way with our talents, with our possibilities. And lastly, we need to be willing to stand for equality in our everyday lives, even if we must pay the price of personal loss or sacrifice, just like Jesus did. Jesus' life is an example of a radical feminist. And I want to read this quotes from Education, page 17, to conclude. I know many of us have read this. Some of us maybe know it by heart. But my charge for us today is not to just know them, but to live them. And it reads like this. The greatest want of the world is the want of humans. Humans who will not be bought or sold. Humans who in their inmost souls are true and honest, who do not fear to call sin by its right name, whose conscience is as true to duty as the needle to the pole. Humans who will stand for the right though the heavens fall. But such a character is not the result of accident. It is not due to the special favors or endowments of providence. A noble character is the result of self-discipline, of the subjection of the lower to the higher nature, the surrender of self to the service of love to God and humanity. Let's bow our heads for prayer, and then we can talk. And our God in heaven, thank you for this time together. I ask you that you touch our hearts with courage to be true, to be honest, to be radical. That we don't falter in our walk, we don't falter in our duty. Help us, Lord, as we approach the Sunday law, that we can have a spirit of kindness and inclusion to walk in equality. Take from us biases and traps that are holding us back. In the name of Jesus, amen.